Good morning to the team of The Informed and welcome to this week's edition. Joining me is today is Mario Beeks, #1 author, John Heron, lawyer and victim of crime advocate, Reuben Humphreys, who's been involved in community-based issues, elections, and most jealously, from my perspective, is studying his Masters of Indigenous Archaeology. I'm your host, Caroline Council. I too am a lawyer. So this Saturday, of course, we are seeing the coronation of King Charles III. The question for us is going to be whether he is an appropriate or fit person to be king, given his long-standing association with notorious paedophile, the late Jimmy Saville. And of course, against that backdrop, we have his brother, Prince Andrew, and his close friendship and association with notorious Geoffrey Epstein, and the late Queen Elizabeth stripping her son of his titles. So do Charles and Andrew actually have more in common than we think? Given the King's long-time personal friendship with Jimmy Savile, is this a person that exercises the right qualities and the right behaviour that we would come to expect in a king?
I think guilt by association is not enough to rule him out to be king. Let's be frank. It's your king, and the accession to the throne is by issue. So there's no question in that. As far as Jimmy Savile goes, well, he was on a rampage for years. It was well known within the BBC that he was a bit more than inappropriate, and there were a lot of serious allegations. Charles wouldn't have been aware of any of that whatsoever. My understanding is that he had a lot of association with a lot of British comedians, barring Benny Hill. But I can't see that because he entertained him on a few occasions, that should rule him out for being king. Is there a criteria for that? Not really.
So too long a bow to draw, really?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure you could probably find numerous photos of the Queen shaking hands with Jimmy Savile after performances, probably with a gloved hand, but nonetheless, there'd be a handshake involved. What do the others think, Reuben?
Yeah, I agree with John. It's really quite a long bow to draw. We need to keep in mind as well that for many of these predators, their self-defense is to be as well connected as they can be. So they really, really go as far as they can to develop their networks, their contacts, and develop their forms of protection. So in this case, I would see Charles as the unwitting defense network that Savile was developing. So it's an unfortunate situation, but I would side with Charles on this one.
Yeah, Mario, your thoughts about the fitness of King Charles to be King Charles III and crowned this weekend?
First of all, I apologize. That was a George. We are all online, so say to him, yeah. So like it's good checking this one. Look, I don't know enough of a crown, and look, as the rest of the Europe, like we couldn't care less about crown. We have the, there was always been dramas with everything around the Buckingham Palace, and look, the late thing with the King Charles, his affiliation with this guy is as good as John says. I'm not sure, but we have the track record that the king itself and queen, they're always going to do the best that possible they can to prevent people to know the full extent of the truth. So I don't think so he's fit at first place, because how old he's 79, how old he's 74, 75, and that's his. I think that's a more worrying question. He's in a fragile age, and I was becoming the king for how long? But I don't think so he's fit. I don't think so. Association is for him is a beneficiary. Actually, it's detrimental. That's what I believe.
I think my understanding that Charles used to entertain various comedians in the palace as a prince. One of them that I recall was the two Ronnies. used to go in there and he would crack up at laughing with them. And I knew that because when I was playing rugby in England, one of the guys had dinner with one of the Ronnies there, who explained that he used to go to the Palace and Charles would laugh his head off. And there was a recent skit with the late Sir Les Patterson, where he dropped into the box with Charles and Camilla very recently, and all very amused at the Royal Variety Show. So I don't think that there's anything to be seen there. Now, the other coin that you mentioned about Epstein in the US and Prince Andrews, that's a completely different.
I see. So, John, to interrupt you, like, I hardly, no, I can't buy this one. You know why? Because the Queen itself and everybody else on the court, they've been briefed, if not daily, by the intelligence services, and they knew what's going on. I mean, maybe they can't take advantages. The action as a law enforcement agencies, but they knew it. What's happening in the background. Of course, they knew who's going to be good for them, who's going to be bad for them in their presence. I truly believe they knew who is doing what, but I still believe that they associate themselves in a times when they suit them to associate with themselves with all these comedians. And after it was like, oh, it's not my fault. It's you peasants. It's like that's.
Yeah, I don't think Savile was in the same thing, or they would have been briefed, because, as an example, like Savile operating with the full knowledge of the BBC, and of course, all the BBC did was cover it up, so it never really got out. So I don't think the Palace would have been aware of it. That was just my take on it. But as I say with Epstein, it's a different category there, and of course, social media and conspiracy theories is always a buzz with who was on Epstein's client list. Now, we know that Prince Andrew denied that, although he entered into a multi-million-dollar payout with a supposed victim. But and because of that controversy, as you said, Caroline, he had his title stripped from him. So there's more smoke and fire there. If you want to go down that burrow, the conspiracy theories always thrive in a vacuum of information. So the vacuum of information about Epstein's client list continues to roll on.
Yeah, Ruben's point is well made also, that the conspiracy of silence has to wrap around these notorious pedophiles for them to continue to target victims and exploit those victims for their own ends and purposes. And I think about Harvey Weinstein in that category as well. The fact that Hollywood was well aware of it, people that worked with him well aware of the behaviour, and turned a blind eye because of who they become. So status buys them that level of security. I would hope that we as a society are becoming more attuned and more aware, but these are masters of deceit, and even people that aren't notorious that target children for their own ends. They have a modus operandi, so to speak, of being able to inculcate themselves into the lives of families and their victims. So do we really point fingers at Charles in that regard? If they are so manipulative and so deceitful, if the average person can't see it, many pastors and priests, apart from pedophile priests, of course, who work with families, say that they weren't aware of the pedophiles in their midst or in their congregations, because often it's religious congregations that get targeted, if you will, by pedophiles.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Caroline. Our own minds do us a disservice. We imagine that these predators are horrid, shriveled creatures with poor personalities, and that's not the reality. They only get to function by being highly successful, by being very charming, by being attractive, by being able to convince you that everything is fine and wonderful, so that you are willing to let your children be in their company. So they are masters of deceit, masters of manipulation, and they work on building empires of loyalty amongst others of their kind, so that they're all looking out for each other. So it's a very difficult situation to be in, because you don't recognize them when they're in front of you. You only know how obvious it was in hindsight. And
Yeah.
It could be, to use John's words, it could be a bit of a long bow to draw to assume that Charles had knowledge and willing participation in something so horrendous. I think he was like the rest of us. We didn't know. The rest of us didn't know at that time. I'm not sure how anybody else is supposed to know either.
Can I ask something? Like, if even okay, one thing what is always lacking with the family, royal family, it's apology to the public. They never apologize. So like they knew it. Even the Prince Andrew, he knew it. I was a little bit Epstein, a little bit fly, all these solitas. But look, Tom is gonna pay a couple $100 million, and I'm not going to prison. But there's no sorry. King Charles go to same same package. You know what I mean? Unfortunately for me, the King Charles and Camilla, they are my city from Croatia. They become very famous and favorite city in last couple years. So they're coming and they're preparing the wedding simultaneously in Croatia, my city Osijek. And the people over there, like they can't understand what's happening because, as you say, he knew who he was after he died, but never King Charles didn't say, come out and say, I'm sorry, I was associating myself with that guy. I didn't know who he is. That's what I don't understand. Why we have a lack of this to say, I'm sorry.
Wouldn't it be because they can't demonstrate that they have feet of clay, that they are not amongst the ranks of mortals? John, your opinion?
Yeah, actually, in the ranks of mortals, you may not know that in the Solomon Islands, Prince Charles is a deity and is appropriately worshipped. The only sort of main road is the Prince Charles Highway. There's a town named after him as well. He speaks pidgin English, and you'll see his photograph on the mantelpiece of a lot of people in the capital, Honiara. So he's not a mere mortal.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. He's also head of the Church of England.
That's true.
And in relation to the coronation ceremony this Saturday, as with Queen Elizabeth, the one aspect of the ceremony that is being clouded in mystery still is the anointing of the king, which is basically when he becomes imbued with God and is therefore an instrument of God. I accept the fact that when he was Prince Charles, an apology may have been forthcoming, but of course the royal line of succession means that he would have been walking into the position of king with feet of clay, and I don't think he can be seen to have feet of clay. He's other than I think you need to think of a monarchy or being a king or a queen as being separate from the person. And that's certainly how they sell this concept of monarchy. This is how they manage to inspire a nation by saying, well, it's not really Charles the person. It's not the pen throwing, tantrum chucking person that is king. It is king who's imbued with God that is in fact our monarch. Does that make sense to anybody?
Yeah, but that just about apologies and public appearances. Prince Andrew's appearance on, I think it was Channel 4 in the UK, and an interview was considered to be probably the worst PR disaster for the royal family since King Edward's abdication. And it was interesting reading some of the background the other day. They're never going to go down that path ever again, remotely near that. And that was basically his own end by being forthright on television, and that's not going to happen again.
Yep, I agree with that.
Was there arrogance and hubris in that I say my truth and everybody's going to accept it? Was he so far out of touch with public perception that he just misstepped it so dramatically?
Andrew, yes.
Yeah. The I don't sweat print concept. Imagine that in rigorous cross-examination, John, in court. That wouldn't last very long.
No, he was drowning at the time, and let's hypothetically take his side and say he didn't know this person. Maybe that's true, but still, if he knew the person or not, with the amount of media attention floating around. It was, and I think I read where the Queen was horrified when she knew it was going on. But that being said, that will never happen again. You won't see Charles on TV go, "Oh, I shouldn't have met X and Y," because I might have known. Right? This won't happen.
No, there'll be no apologies.
No.
There will be no backstepping. There will just be onwards, upwards, a solid performance. On a more positive note, often when we see changes in leadership in countries, that's often accompanied either by hopefully democratic election or bloodshed in the street. The one thing I would say about the line of succession is it changed hands seamlessly, or from my perspective and my limited knowledge of how monarchy works in England, I know how it affects us with our constitutional monarchy here in Australia, but it certainly seemed seamless. Thoughts about the benefits of succession and constitutional monarchy, given that the real power of the monarch has been more effectively broken, if you will, by the Parliament in England for many a year?
Yeah, I just want to also add that Albo's over for the coronation. So I've got a little tip for Albo, that when he's in at the coronation function, if he wears black tie and tails, he can only wear white gloves in the presence of the royal family.
I hope he knows that, and I hope he's on.
He won't. So just well, maybe in the Housing Commission he had a box with the white gloves. I just want to let him know on that.
Well, I certainly hope he doesn't commit a
that's right,
faux pas on behalf of all of us Australians, because he is indeed representing us as our Prime Minister. And on that point, of a general allegiance to the Crown. So I think he's having a bet each way. I think he's still trying to keep the concept of Australia becoming a republic alive, saying, yes, I'll be doing it, but it's only because it's, form and not substance. Are we buying what he's selling?
Look, each way, Albo, I'll just say this quickly. It's just like the ALP appointing Bill Hayden, a staunch Republican, as the Governor General. Just leave it at that.
Well, in terms of our constitutional monarchy, the day will come when we cease to be toddlers and we become more than teenagers and we enter into our adulthood as a nation, one would hope. I find that concept of breaking away from England far easier, if you will, as has been expressed by a lot of Australians, because it's Charles as king rather than Queen Elizabeth II. Thoughts about where Australia goes to next?
In terms of breaking up with England, or
post coronation.
Yeah, post coronation
and the Commonwealth.
There was a theory that there would have been great reluctance for Australia to break away while Queen Elizabeth was still alive. Now that she's dead, now that we've got King Charles III about to be crowned, is it going to be easier for us as a nation to grow up and move away from the constitutional monarchy that we currently have and into a republic?
I doubt that Australia's ever going to move away from England. That if Australia ever wanted to move away from England, it will move a long time ago. There is a history, and I don't see that this is going to happen another 100, 200 years. Australia is a minion of the UK, and it's a part of Commonwealth. Imagine now playing the World Cricket tournament. They say Commonwealth countries. Australia is not Commonwealth country anymore. It will not happen. It will not happen.
Albo did put down in one of his agendas that a referendum on the Republic was on the cards. Mind you, his other referendums and things like major impacts on immigration were not talked about pre-election. So if that's the form, we could probably assume that there won't be a referendum for that.
Second term, do we think? Ruben, what do you think? Do you think Albo's going to put it to the public in his second term?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I'm in a very interesting space with my Aboriginal background and all of this, because we see the Aboriginal cause being hijacked as part of the justification for a Republican agenda. And yet, not all of us actually share that view. So much so that a few years ago, I even went over and took the oath as a freeman of the City of London. So I'm actually under oath to the Crown, and I'm a strong monarchist myself, despite my Aboriginal background. I think there's going to be that ongoing push, because there are vested interests that are looking forward to the constitutional changes that are being proposed. There are certain incentives there, and I think that's very disingenuous. I think that's very manipulative. I don't think the public are being told the whole truth behind that. But at the same time, I think it's a good thing that we have Albo, because he will not have the strength to see it through if the voice referendum fails, and I hope and I expect that it will. Then he is not going to have the guts to go forward with a Republican referendum either. So as for a second term referendum, I doubt it.
Well, that's interesting, and that's a whole topic in and of itself, is it not? The proposed constitutional changes and the introduction of the voice, if it passes through the referendum. I will say this. There seems to be a certain amount of magic dust that happens when people from our country rub shoulders with monarchs, leaders from other countries. So I'm wondering if some of that magical monastic, well, that's not the right term, but some of the magical dust of Charles's coronation is going to rub off on Albo, and whether he's going to come back with a renewed passion for our connection with England. He's certainly thrilled to bits about the construction of the submarines and our connection
I think,
and America in that regard.
yeah,
Yes,
I think it's a very interesting time, because as all of this is happening, we also have to be mindful that the UK have broken away from the EU, and now we are slowly and not so publicly coming together in a new alliance with the Dominions. So we're looking at a free trade and free movement agreement developing quite rapidly between the UK, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. So that is going to be a good thing. And I think that will help restore a lot of those connections. And if we can start to travel freely around the Commonwealth Dominions, I think we'll find that that alignment of the world is much, much more to our liking than the arrangements that we've had when the EU cut us from the UK. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think Albo is going to change his tune as the money starts to flow across his desk.
I think
Interesting. That's interesting.
On Albo, really, this is just another junket. Right? It's that straight up and down. Like, Australians generally are obsessed with junkets, like no other country I've ever seen in the world. That says me just coming back from one.
I was going to say Vietnam.
I'm part of the problem. But with ALPers, they're absolutely obsessed with. I've seen some shocking things with them, as far as like free trips, junkets. But the appeal of it, it's all on the public purse. They actually get a buzz out of that. Yeah. That these suckers that voted for me are paying for me to fly first class, private jet, suites in Saigon and other places like that, Caroline. But they don't care. It's a junket to him. He'll come back, whether that as it rubs off. No, not really. And the same with all of them. They're just starstruck when he goes to Japan. You know, he wouldn't mention the Hausa stuff, and certainly not with his white gloves at the coronation. But that's all it is.
Yeah, but it's that whole concept of being starstruck, and then
wherever they go,
what that does when it plays off politically. And in particular, I'm thinking about John Howard being in the United States around 9/11, and I'm thinking about, where was our discretion then as a nation before we decided to go to war? Where were the checks? Where were the breaks? Where were the balances? Was John Howard swept away in that tide of being wanting to be seen to support America, given that he was, dare I say it, Johnny on the spot? Much for joining us this week on The Informed, and God save the Queen. King. It's hardwired into me. God save the King.
At Anzac Day, we sang God Save the King.
God save the King.